Hi everyone, just want to welcome everybody to the webinar and we'll get started in just a minute. Okay, so we're going to get started now. Let me just confirm, Jason, you still good? You're there?
Still here, Amanda.
All right, so we'll start with some introductions. Thank you everyone for joining us today. My name is Amanda Shiga. I'm VP of Digital at Nonlinear Creations. I'm also a Sitecore MVP, and I will be co-presenting today with my colleague Jason, and I'll let him introduce himself.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm a solution architect here with Nonlinear Digital, doing a little bit of continuous deployment ALM focus. I'm also a Sitecore MVP like Amanda.
Yep. So we're looking at about 20 minutes each for two parts of this webinar. What we'd really like to share today is a little bit of background on Sitecore XP. Looking at the attendee list, I think we have a wide grouping of people from partners, from clients, and also from Sitecore. So I really want to convey how we're approaching carving out quick and long-lasting value with the XP, i.e. version 8, and a little bit of how a marketer's daily activities might look with our recommendations. To close the loop on that, we're also going to be making some recommendations about infrastructure planning. So the second part has a bit of a more technical angle, and our biggest message there is not to underestimate this part. So if you're on the line and you're not particularly technical, I would advise it's still highly valuable to at least get a high-level understanding of what's required so you can help support your organization in making sure this is set up properly so you can fully leverage the advantages of the features. What we're going to do is allow for questions to be written in the questions window of your GoToMeeting interface, and we will have a look at those at the end of the session. So I'm going to start by just backing up a little bit and talking about the age of the customer and the buzzword of customer experience. So as you can see here, this is a nice little chart done by Forrester. Really, we are inside of the age of the customer right now, and there's a customer obsession. Everything right now has migrated over to customer experience. So one of the quotes from Gartner predicts is that nearly 90% of companies believe that customer experience, which is the end-to-end improvements of every touch point that your customer has, will be a primary basis for competition and differentiation. And platforms like Sitecore are certainly at the forefront of enabling that, at least in the digital channels, enabling marketers' capability of tweaking and improving that customer experience constantly and personalizing it. The Sitecore evolution, those of you on the line may be on any variation of 6, 7, or 8, but really with the advent of 8 and beyond, the motto really is to empower organizations to build those relationships and really look at the customer lifetime value. So back in version 7, there was very much a foundation laid on content scaling and data scaling, and version 8 truly is a next generation of marketing features. So there's a deep focus on the customer. There's an expanded footprint to the product, and there's a bit of a widening gulf, and this is a bit of an interesting phenomenon that I've seen at least. The challenge for many organizations is that their marketing teams aren't quite yet able to leverage the sophistication of some of the more advanced features in the platforms, but I think that's going to boomerang a little bit. I think hearing what's on the roadmap and seeing where the technology is going, I think we are going to sort of circle back, and website technology is going to get smarter and it's going to become self-optimizing. We're not quite there yet, which is why it's important when we advise our clients on using these platforms, it's important to understand how to sort of carve off a very manageable and bite-sized piece. So just to do a little bit of level setting, you may be curious in terms of where organizations are. I did a little number crunching on our own client base, and it's pretty evenly distributed still between 6 and 7 in terms of version. Everybody, of course, is very interested in upgrading to 8. Lots of conversations happening about upgrades and new builds. We've got about 20% who are already on 8, either upgraded or in the midst of a new build. And then use of the DMS, so those who are still on 6 and 7, we saw maybe about a quarter of them actually actively using it. So again, a lot of good intentions, a lot of interest. It's still everyone's looking to take those baby steps in order to get the ROI. So that's what we're seeing in terms of trends. Additionally, you may have seen this customer experience maturity model. This is something published by Sitecore, and it's actually a very helpful resource to understand where you're at in terms of using these features and your organizational maturity. Again, this is a statistic I saw somewhere, but the majority of organizations are sitting in the attract phase there, and the holy grail, of course, is to move up towards advocate. So the DMS, and I will explain a few of these terms for anyone who's new to Sitecore on the line. DMS stands for Digital Marketing System. This was the terminology used for the marketing features of Sitecore on version 6 and 7. So you could call it the first generation. We helped a lot of clients accelerate their first DMS campaigns, and we really focused on quick wins to show fast results. There was a lot of low-hanging fruit that we identified in terms of the features available and mapping tactics to the sales cycle. Building skill sets and familiarity with the product, and we've had some great success stories. So quite a few case studies if you're interested on our website if you want to check out some of the things we've done on version 6 and 7 with our clients. The actual palette of features inside of both 7 and 8 can be outlined as such. I won't go through each of these. If you're curious to know more about what's inside these, I would recommend that you ask for a demo from someone because just to demo these things is probably 1 to 2 hours alone, and I would highly recommend it. But some of the most valuable features inside of the product are listed here. I'll call out a couple. Visitor profiling, so the ability to generate a sense of who someone is by what they're looking at on the website. The A/B testing, multivariate testing, what versions of content and images drive more conversions or drive more value. There's different types of personalization available, so very simple rules-based or more sophisticated profile-based. And then, of course, there's analytics, and that feature in particular has evolved greatly between version 7 and 8. So what you're looking at here is what you get in the DMS. Once we pop up to Sitecore 8, we're adding quite a bit more to our arsenal. So the reporting and the underlying database for analytics has evolved greatly. It's now using Mongo, and there's an interface that's better, more akin to Google Analytics. There's an experience profile, which is really a drive towards providing that 360-degree view of the customer. There's path and page analysis. There's much more robust optimization capabilities, so the ability to understand whether a test is successful based on not only engagement value, but also specific conversion points. The Federated Experience Manager has been introduced, which allows us to do to monitor traffic and also to apply personalization on websites not served by Sitecore. So the premise here is that there's a core, when you think about Sitecore 8, there's a core group of new capabilities, I think, that can be exploited as a part of your quick wins. So building on the DMS quick wins, here's a quick example from one of our case studies. Rotman School of Management in Toronto, a simple personalization rule that was set up. They're targeting new students from various points in the world, and our efforts there did yield some very concrete results. So bounce rate reduced, visit duration increased, pages per visit increased, and that's the kind of quick win and immediate results reporting you want to do when you use this stuff. How do we carve out high-value first steps with XDB? So again, When you're thinking about this, it's really important to recall the focus of Sitecore 8. So it's evolved. There's a strong focus now on customer relationship nurturing, so that ability to build a relationship over time. Engagement value is a concept that is baked deeply into almost every feature. So it's in the testing and optimization, it's in the analytics, it's in the path analysis and the page analysis. Content profiling, one of the most powerful differentiators between Sitecore Analytics and Google Analytics is this ability to look at report segmentation by persona, and that's built right into Sitecore. It's all natively there in terms of profiling your content and then seeing the results. And then you have your experience profile and the concept of your contact, providing the 360-degree view. So if you look at it through this lens, the argument for upfront investment becomes stronger. So recall that previously we really focused on quick wins. So to give you an example, a lot of our DMS engagements focused on simple personalization rules and simple testing. I think with Sitecore 8, you need to look at investing upfront a little bit more in order to get that early business value out of it. So what do a marketer's roadmap and daily operations look like in Sitecore 8? And I'm going to pause here and do a small aside about teams. I would say that marketing technology team composition probably deserves its own webinar, but if I could give you one piece of quick advice as part of this one, I would say look at your team and handpick either one very tech-savvy marketer or one marketing-savvy techie, and basically say you are now the Sitecore XP guru, and they should really strive to gain intermediate analytics skills. They should have a deep functional understanding of Sitecore XP out-of-the-box features, a sufficient technical understanding of the plumbing across both XP and across the broader marketing technology landscape. And if you have this person available to you, either in your own team or outsourced, you'll be really well positioned to then grow the team around them. There's a lot of talk right now about broader organizational change required. Those initiatives are big and difficult. Again, if I can make one simple recommendation, it would be to find this person and have them dedicated to building this skill set. So your opportunity with Sitecore 8 in our recommendation is to carve out a starting flow to study and optimize, and that flow should be the ideal balance between demonstrable value, your team's skill set, exploiting the capabilities, and Sitecore's role in your ecosystem. Our number one tip is to increase upfront investment. So if we step back and think about our marketing team and our day in the life, there's some groundwork to be done before that daily rhythm can set in. So this would be my first tip in terms of where to start. So invest in the customer journey map and KPIs. Again, each of these deserves its own webinar. The customer journey map is something we've found extremely valuable in terms of mapping out the end-to-end flow and identifying various pieces along it. Key performance indicators as well. The data-driven decision-making is a key part of Sitecore 8 as well. So as you think about your daily and weekly optimization rhythm, you're going to want to go back and keep revisiting those KPIs and checking against them. So the low-hanging fruit, the simple personalization, the simple testing, it still exists, but you will get earlier and ongoing ROI from these two specific things. So I highly recommend stepping back and looking at scoring with engagement value and content profiling for segmentation and personalization. So before I get into those, a quick quote from Sitecore themselves, and we've seen this too. If you do prioritize this stuff in phase 1, you will get deeper insights and higher short-term benefits. So the customer journey map, this is one that we did briefly for Embraer. It's not probably detailed enough as one that would come out of an actual engagement because those are typically fairly private to organizations. But the general gist here is that you can see that the flow of purchasing a private jet has been mapped out, and the power that this gives you in looking at it across basically the customer lifecycle is that you can actually dig into things like questions asked, activities completed, touch points, summary of the user's experience. And what you can hang on this is the actual tactics you can use across this journey that are part of Sitecore. And I'll show you in a minute how that really sort of comes to fruition with the concept of engagement value across the journey and lead nurturing. KPIs, for those of you who may not be familiar with setting these up, it's really just an exercise of transitioning your online objectives into very concrete, measurable things. And you can keep measuring these against baselines as you go to see those immediately results, whether things are getting better. So again, if you're looking, everyone wants to improve their conversion rates. It's fairly universal. That can be translated into various measures that I've listed here. So it's really important to have this table in place. A quick note on engagement value. So the basic premise here is that not all visitors are created equally, and the actions they take on your site are either more valuable or less valuable. And what you can do up front here is an exercise whereby you are ranking what's happening on your website. So there's a simple example here on the right-hand side. This will be individual for each of your organizations. But in terms of whether a lead is cold, warm, or hot, you can probably take a stab at assigning a relative value all the way from sort of light engagement with certain pieces of content all the way up to something really, really hard and fast, like an actual purchase or a membership sign up or anything like that. So we, of course, do engagements with clients. We have a framework around how you can actually put this together, and it can even be informed by your Google Analytics. So we've got some blog posts on that if you want to check that out later. Content profiling as well is done inside of Sitecore, and I'll actually switch over quickly here to show you real quick what that looks like for anyone who doesn't know. I'll actually pause here. This is Sitecore 8. If you haven't seen it yet, it's got a new look and feel. This is what's called the dashboard, and this is really where the marketer lives, and they, depending on their roles and security settings, they'll see some less or more of these actual applications here. But to get back to good old Sitecore, I just go to my desktop, and it's, again, it has a new look and feel, but it's very familiar. The content profiling concept is really a matter of setting up your personas. In here, I've got a travel website that's a demo. So for example, I have a California adventure trip. What I've done here is I've set up 3 personas. Gavin is one of them. He's a married father of 2 who enjoys fun and structured family vacations. He's got a very specific profile to him. So in tagging California Adventure, I'm indicating that anyone who browses to this page will be tagged with Gavin and will accumulate a number of points towards various facets that make up my persona determination. For conversion points, the concept of goals, again, that's really easy to set up. I have a Book Now page, and if I go here into Analyze and go to my goals, hang on, it's a little bit slow. I actually have a laundry list. These are set up in the Marketing Center, and each of them has an engagement value assigned to them. So my Book Now form, this is actually just viewing it, I think I gave that a score of 50, and the actual Book Now conversion I gave a score of 100. So that's what the concept looks like really quickly inside of Sitecore. So tip number 2, carve out a thin slice. So this is a concept I've been talking to clients about. Again, in Sitecore 8, there's a very significant emphasis on the contact, so the customer, the identified customer, and also on integrations. So Sitecore typically these days doesn't sit in isolation. The value of it comes increasingly from pulling together data and having customer flows expand across Sitecore and other marketing platforms. So a simple example would probably be you've got some AdWords, the flow through Sitecore to a landing page, and then the form submission goes into your CRM. So it's not often anymore that we see Sitecore sitting by itself. And Sitecore knows that, and they actually are working very hard on a very robust integration framework. The second point here is that the experience profile provides the most value when it's actually connected to a customer database. So I'll show you that in a minute. But when we're trying to get a sense of who's who inside of our visitors and what their behavior is, it's very valuable when we start pulling in data from other sources. So again, the obvious one is your CRM. If we combine known information about name, address, picture, etc., purchases, if we combine that with historical browsing data, we have a very powerful picture of who that is. So when I recommend carving out a thin slice, I am recommending carving out a flow that nurtures the customer engagement end to end. So a quick win you might have looked at on its own, like a personalization rule, is very small, easy to deploy, and easily measurable. What I'm recommending with Sitecore 8 is that you expand that concept a little bit and actually think of a flow whereby you can actually see engagement value in use end to end. So a couple of examples of what I'm talking about here. An organic referral through to a website behavior, through to a conversion page, through to a CRM conversion is one example. Another slice might be behavior of a particular persona from interest to conversion. But the idea here is that you're not trying to boil the ocean, and that you're really being choosy as you start out with a slice of something, and it should be longitudinal across that customer journey to really see the true benefit of using Sitecore 8. You can use your customer journey map as a big inspiration piece here. So your day in the life actually becomes very focused on this thin slice as per our recommendation. So what we recommend in terms of a regular rhythm is, of course, reviewing your KPIs daily or weekly. This should be the foundation of everything. Consider taking a page from Agile Marketing. There's a manifesto, but at its simplest, fail fast, fail early, experiment, be more nimble and agile as you're trying things out and as you're learning. One of the biggest ROIs of using Sitecore 8 is really what your marketing team is going to learn just from observing what is the Gavin persona doing, and what can I learn about him and the pages that he's interacting with. Leverage your quick wins with the greater context afforded by those investments you've made in your profiling and engagement value. Examine your persona's behavior. So what needs tweaking? Has engagement value increased with personalization? Path and page performance informed by value per visit, and then of course the experience profile. So B2B, you might look at individual lead nurturing. B2C, you might use it more for insight and research into persona behavior because the volume of people coming through is too great really to nurture individuals. So a quick note on what that might look like in Sitecore if I go back to my Launchpad. So let's say I come in the morning and I have a review of my KPIs and I want to see how my Gavin persona is doing. There's a few new things in here that whereby I want to show you how you can immediately leverage having done that upfront work. So inside of my experience analytics, if you haven't seen this before, it's very similar. I'd say it's probably a subset of what Google Analytics does. But the two things that it's really popping out here for you is that there's a big emphasis on value. So a lot of these reports are emphasizing value per visit. You can also see top pattern matches by value. So again, if I want to focus on my family traveler, that's my Gavin persona, I can immediately see here he's in blue that for some reason in this particular time frame, the value per visit generated by my Gavins has jumped up, and I can try to drill in and identify what that looks like. I can also pop over here into pattern matches and understand immediately some key information about my family traveler, simple things like volume of visits, and then down here I can have a look at how much value per visit my Gavin is generating, how long are they visiting on average, their average bounce rate, etc. So that can immediately inform where you want to optimize, where you want to do some testing. I won't have time to go through everything here. So again, I encourage you to book a demo if you haven't seen this stuff. But just really quickly, I will show you a couple of other cool things that I would include as part of your daily or weekly analysis. If I am looking to understand a little bit more about where I should optimize, especially in relation to Gavin, I can also pop in here and do some page level analysis. So let's have a look at Book Now. If I go up here to Analyze, I actually have a cool new thing called Page Analyzer. And I can combine this with my knowledge of my persona's behavior with value-related statistics about this particular page. So my Book Now page is basically my conversion form. And what this little graph is telling me based on the red and the green is where I have very efficient generation of value per visit. So a path, this green one here, for example, from home to Book Now is very efficient, and the red ones are less so. So for example here, the California Adventure is another one that's very efficient in generating conversions, whereby another trip here, for example, Space Camp, is less efficient. So there's something about California Adventure that's working really well in terms of value, and Space Camp's not doing so well. So that immediately gives me some insight. And if I know that those are both tagged with my Gavin persona, which I do know, it helps me dig in along my thin slice and understand where I can start to optimize. So those are just a couple of examples of how a marketer's daily operations could evolve using this platform. One of the assets we're currently working on is more detailed flows for each of these day in the life examples, and we'll be publishing those in the next month or so. So I would recommend looking out for those when we give them. So just finishing up my section here. The advantages of taking this approach, again, you can immediately enhance the value of what you've collected. If you just sort of turn on your Mongo and start collecting without tagging anything, even if you don't have the bandwidth to immediately start doing things like personalization, setting up those values will make sure that in 3 months or 5 months when you can return to it, you've got an incredibly valuable set of data, and you've got engagement value to analyze, and you've got profiling to look at. Frame your audience and content in terms of EV from the beginning, and this will only train you to start thinking about your content in this context from the get-go, and that will make sure you can get the most out of Sitecore. And again, don't boil the ocean. So the thin slice approach allows for manageable improvements across an entire flow, making it easier to replicate vertically, and you can realize the vision more quickly. And finally, keeping the future in mind. You are collecting a lot of data. So what does this mean long-term for your data strategy? With Google Analytics, or if you're using Web Trends or something else, we do recommend that you still run them side by side and start to look at how they can play together. Again, the advantage of Sitecore Analytics is that you have it all raw. You have every single line, and that can be, if you do have a broader BI initiative, you can use something like the Experience extractor to pull that out if you want to use it inside of your own BI tools. And as well, your team's skill set should be growing. So again, starting with this stuff means people get used to the concepts earlier and they're readier to use the more advanced features. Sitecore will be releasing 8.1, 8.2, 9, and the roadmap is mind-blowing. So you want to be ready for that and be able to use it. So with that, all that said, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Jason, and he's going to talk a little bit about, in order to do all of this wonderful stuff, we do need to get the XDB up and running. So I want to give everyone a sense of what's actually involved with this, so that you really make sure you have the time to plan it and get it set up properly. So Jason, I'll probably just take your lead on when you want me to switch slides.
Sure thing, Amanda. Thanks very much, everybody. We're going to get a little bit into the weeds on some of this stuff, but I'm going to try to keep it kind of at your planning level. So we're thinking, as we spoke about earlier, how it's very, very important to, before you go and get started on Sitecore, to really start thinking about what you're going to be doing here so that you know that you've got the infrastructure in place to support what you're going to do. You don't want to be having go launch live day, you get everything up and going, and you don't have enough to back it up. So what we're going to talk about here is how you get ready for that success. How do you think this through, go step by step, and be ready to launch? So we're going to be looking at what do you need to do to scale? What do you need to do about licensing? Should you go cloud? Should you be on-premise? You have different questions that are going to lead to these different answers. And we're going to cover a few other things such as operational performance and GYP, which kind of blend into the whole flow of how all this technology pulls together. And finally, we're going to wrap up with a few tips and tricks and some frequently asked questions that we've gotten from clients about XTB and how it runs, and maybe some technical pieces in there. So Amanda, if you move on, we're going to get started here on the scaling side of things. So the first thing you have to do is figure out, what do I need from the XTB infrastructure? What kind of like traffic are we going to be looking at? There's a lot of questions that you're going to be going through. And the first thing we need to do, and we can't emphasize this enough, is you've got to do some kind of formal planning on this. Before you even think about buying a license, think about what it is you're going to buy first. And I mean, this would go for almost anything you're going to purchase. But it's very important when we're going to Sitecore 8. There's a lot of things running behind the scenes on XTB, a lot of different models and ways you can tweak things. You want to be able to pick the right plan. And before you can go and do that, we really recommend doing some kind of whiteboarding. Taking a cross-section of your team, people who are going to know all kinds of different pieces about what happens with your digital assets, they can come together, start drawing it out. You can start seeing where everything falls into place. Someone's going to know, hey, we're using this back-end system and it's got a bunch of customer data and we've got this amount of traffic that's coming in. And this team are going to catch all these issues early, and they're going to ask the questions like, are we expecting traffic growth? Are we suddenly going to have some kind of spike that's going to blow out our usage of our content delivery servers? What are our needs for high availability? What about the analytics data? If that's a little bit slow getting to our reporting engine, is that okay? What kind of hosting do we have? All these types of things you have to go through. And Amanda, if we move on to the next section, we're going to take a look a little bit at what a scaled infrastructure looks like. And we're going to go through different pieces of this. What you're looking at here is a diagram of pretty blown out, heavy installation. You've got about 6 content delivery servers in play here, and you've got an aggregation processing server and a reporting service server. And what we're going to do is talk through this kind of model and what all these little elements play in your XTB infrastructure. The real focus to know here is that this all scales up and down. You may be at a much smaller scale, or you may be at an even bigger scale, but the concepts still apply. You're going to be scaling pieces out and scaling them down based on your needs. So the first thing we want to look at is going to be the collection database, and this is critical. This is where everything is going to be going in, and it is a mandatory part of XTB. You're going to be wanting to have very, very important information all being stored in this collection database. Your reports are going to be driven out of this, and all your traffic is going into it. So you need to start thinking, okay, do I need high availability of this system or not? If you don't, then you probably can get away with a single instance of your collection DB, because you're not going to have to fail over. But if you start going into failover, it's not just, oh, now I've got 2 systems up. With a MongoDB replica set, you're actually talking 3 or more, because you need to have an arbiter in place, and that arbiter is going to decide where's your primary storage. That allows you to have some data failover in the case of a problem with one of the storage databases. So if you have many content delivery servers, you might have actually more than 3 instances, because you may need even more redundancy in your data, so you might have an arbiter and 4 storage. But that is something you have to think about with your high availability. Now, the replica set is being recommended for pretty much everybody if you're going to use XP features strategically. So Amanda was showing you about using goals and plans and tracking people. If you're going to be going to that level and really leveraging it, you probably want to get it to a replica set, because now your data is important to how your business runs, and at that point you want to make sure you have failover. Now, if you're not in that scenario, you can probably scale up one instance over time. So you can start off with a lower footprint and start working your way up. The rule of thumb from a sizing perspective on this collection database is you're probably looking around 5K for each interaction, maybe 2.5K for each identified contact, and that's roughly about 80% of the disk space that Mongo's going to be using up. So there's some other overhead that's in there, but 80% of what you're using up is going to be that kind of ratio of the data coming in. Now, other than collection DB, there's also the concept of session state. Now, in the past, you probably haven't been setting up a session state server unless absolutely necessary. But with XDB and the way that we want to scale things out, it's really important to start thinking about your session state storage, either whether you're going to use it or how you're going to use it and how much you're going to scale it out. So this storage is kind of all your visitors' data while they're visiting through the website. Before it gets into the collection database, Sitecore is trying to keep track of what the user is doing. When the session ends, it flushes it down in. So it's kind of important to make sure that that session state is done properly. Now, you may be able to do multiple devices all coming through from the same user and gather it all together and then get sent in. Now, we've recommended using Mongo for this type of storage. It's really fast for this type of data. But there's one thing that you do want to think about is the session state per cluster. So if you've geographically divided your content delivery servers, let's say you've got one in Hong Kong and then one over in I don't know, California. At this point, those content delivery clusters are separated and you need to have a session state for each one. And then they'll feed into that common collection pool that you've got.
Jason, I'll just add quickly here. The session state is probably one of the coolest parts of Sitecore 8 in that it enables us to a visitor is no longer just a cookie. So if with the session state, it means that we can actually consolidate contact visits together. So if you're coming in from a physical store on your phone and then you later go to the website, if there's some unique identifier, the session state storage is what enables us to tie that all together.
Yeah, very good point, Amanda. It's that whole owning the experience and knowing your contact and getting the full view. And so we've talked about the collection, we've talked about session state, and one of the other boxes that's in here is the processing server. So you've probably heard about these. If you haven't already gone in Sitecore 8, someone's probably told you about Sitecore 8's processing servers. These do multiple different things, but when you're thinking about whether or not you need a processing server separate from your current instances, you have to start thinking, do I have a high traffic volume? If so, I'm probably going to need to start offloading some of the processing to these specific processing instances that will handle the extra input that's coming through without affecting the website. So you offload things like aggregation and reporting. So aggregation, for example, is when we try to process a lot of the data that's in the collection database to make it available for reporting. And then your reporting operations obviously are the pieces where we actually go out to the data and get all that reporting. Offloading that off of your content delivery servers or your content management servers is very, very important from a performance perspective. So the rule of thumbs that we usually work through, so you got one for each thumb, you got 1 million interactions per month, you probably need at least one processing server. If you've got 2 to 4 content delivery nodes, you probably need a processing server. So if you go by that and you look at your own setup and how you typically run right now, you can probably already get an idea of what kind of processing server infrastructure you might need. Now you can use any of your licensed production Sitecore instances to become a processing instance. So if you happen to only need one processing server, you can just use one of your instances that you've got. Maybe you've got a backup content authoring server or something like that and start using that. Now, if you happen to be in the situation where you're less than 500,000 interactions every month, so we were talking 1 million needing a minimum one processing server, but if you're actually less than 500,000, you can probably start pulling all that aggregation and indexing and everything all to your content management node. So if you're in that smaller scale, then you can actually start consolidating all this together and have a lighter footprint in terms of Sitecore licensing and server instances. So that's very handy to have those questions ready and know what you're going to do before you go and start buying the licenses. Now we mentioned the reporting services when we were talking about processing server. There is this whole cool new reporting architecture that's in there which allows to pull all this data that we've been gathering via the reporting services layer. So something like the experience analytics that Amanda was just showing is using this layer, and you can get raw data out of Mongo. You've got the aggregated SQL Server data. If you're going to really be doing a lot of this, you probably want a dedicated server for this. That way you can boost performance across the board and make sure those reports are coming out. You do have to run a Sitecore instance to do reporting. So as you saw with Amanda, you're using Sitecore to view the reports, but it's also Sitecore that's making that reporting data available. So you need to be able to have an instance running for that. Now, If you're in the lower scale, we were talking earlier about consolidation. This is something that you might want to run alongside your aggregation alongside your content management. That'll allow you to reduce your license footprint, be able to reduce your infrastructure footprint, but still manage what you're wanting to do from a responsiveness. Now, there is a little bit of config layers, like a lot of these processing servers. You've got to get in and do specific configuration settings in order to get it to actually work like a reporting service. And that's all documented online. You can get all that information from Sitecore in their doc portal. Now, moving along, we get to talk about something that we don't often get to talk about here, is the Solr indexes. The prevailing theory in the past is that you only really needed to go to Solr if you really had this high demand need for fast indexing. But now with XDB, there's actually a need to start running this because XDB is using these indexes. Because the service aggregates all of that data together onto an index, you now need a high availability of that. So if you want to be able to query it from a CM environment, you need to be able to get that kind of consolidated view that Solr can provide from you instead of trying to access files directly on the system. So if you're going to separate the CM from your processing, so we talked about earlier, can we put out an aggregation service as processing server? In that instance, CM separate from aggregation, you probably need to go and start putting in this type of Solr index on that data so that you can query it correctly. Now, if you go to the Xtb Cloud, that's kind of like cloud in a box. You've got XDB there, everything's all there. You don't need to worry about Solr. It's hosted in the cloud. Don't just point and shoot. But if you're running everything on the CM, like we talked about earlier, bringing stuff together, that's when you can also take the advantage of it's right there. I don't need Solr right now. Now, if you get into anything beyond primary edition licensing, that's probably not a model you want to go with. So most clients, are, other than pretty small deployments, are going to probably rolling out into that Solr-based infrastructure. Now, this state here is that to talk about scale beyond just trying to meet the XDB requirements is now you're talking about performance. So you've got vertical and horizontal scaling. Sitecore 8 has done a really great job here that you can actually bring in all kinds of scaling options. So everything you used to be able to do with any type of web tier, you can do here with the XDB. So on the left, we're looking at vertical scaling where we can start session database separate from collection database, separate from reporting. You can separate it all in its different tiers, take advantage of all the RAM and hard disk you've got available to you, and be able to just make one content delivery node just peak performance on it. Or you can collapse it all the way down. So you can actually, either way you want to go. And on a horizontal perspective, now you can start doing your geographic clusters. You can start making sure you've got high availability. You can start separating things out. Now there's a certain point where everything has to come together. You want that data all in that collection so that the CM can get to it. But this availability to really get performance out to a big peak is really great that's in there now. But is it something you want to talk about when you're doing your high availability? Are we impacted by anything from a vertical or horizontal perspective? Now, in the licensing section, there's a bunch of licensing stuff that you want to be thinking about. So you've gone through, you've figured out from a scale, this is probably what we need from a server footprint. Now we got to start talking, how are we going to go through the different models? So you've got 3 options to you, depending on what model you fall into. If you're a brand new customer, have no DMS or Sitecore right now, you get to either go through the Xtb Cloud subscription, so that's that XDB in a box I was talking about, where it's out in the web, you don't have to think about it, or you got the Xtb on-premise, which is very traditional, like what you would do now when you've hosted Sitecore 7 and you've got DMS right there running on your servers. So you set up everything locally in your own infrastructure. If you have DMS already before January 2015, you have a third option available to you, and this is an a la carte. This is kind of the closest to what you have now. This gives you any number of contacts and interactions, and the other 2 options are actually license-based, cost based on these contacts and interactions. So the existing DMS, you get this option of, okay, I've got unlimited, but I'm not getting any processing servers. So if you're that type of person that needs processing servers separated, then you're going to maybe have to purchase some extra server licenses for that. So that's that third option you get into. So what we've tried to do here is to make this a little bit easier, is to try to give some pros and cons. Why would I choose cloud? Why would I go on-premise? So obviously going cloud managed service. I mean, you don't have to think about anything. You pay somebody monthly price and it just works. That's the intent behind going with the Xtb Cloud. And then you also don't need anybody from your team having to know about MongoDB, know about collection servers or anything like that. They don't have to worry about the ramp up time. Now, the cons on that is that it's not yet compliant with the privacy standards. So if you follow something like the HIPAA or any other privacy concerns, they're not necessarily compliant, which means you may not be able to legally follow in that data model. So that's something per organization you have to look at. You also can't extend what's out there. Since it's out in the cloud, you're not really able to go in. So some of the modules like the experience extractor are not going to be compatible yet with that type of model. So that's something to look at when you're looking at cloud. What do you plan on using XDB for? Now the on-premise, you get kind of the pro is like it's there. You can do whatever data residency policies you need. You can manage it completely instead of the infrastructure. You can change everything that you need to. And you have an option for perpetual licensing. So whereas the XDB has a monthly subscription service, you go through a perpetual licensing that you can go through on XDB. Now the cons of going on-premise is that you're going to have to know about all those pieces in the XDB. So we just talked about all the elements that come together. That's not something your team needs to be comfortable to take on. And a lot of organizations just don't have that expertise right now. It's not just another SQL Server database like it used to be with DMS. You're now talking about Mongo replication sets. I mentioned arbiters being in play, doing all that configuration. Solar might be coming into the picture, and maybe your team is not familiar with how to configure and tune Solar. So those things are things to think about, and whether your team has the bandwidth to take that on. So one of the things we additionally went on top of this is we've started going through all these questions in our head and realized that you can probably make most of these decisions with a simple decision tree. So there's still some gray areas in here, but if Mandy, if you wouldn't mind pulling up the link that's on there on that image. So we've made this available online. We have a blog post about it that links to this image. And what this graph gives you is the ability to kind of start thinking about what those questions are. So questions like, do I have anybody who knows Mongo? Yes or no? And they'll lead you down different paths. So Amanda, if you can zoom out just a little bit. Or in between somewhere in there. I'm not sure.
Okay. Please, I'm wondering if we just sort of
maybe I'll talk to some of the questions
in terms of the time, I think maybe we refer people to the link and they can look at it in detail.
Yeah, okay, great. And just as it covers, try to drill you down to, should I do cloud, should I do the out of the box or the on-premise, a la carte, all those options. And there is a way to get into that gray area where maybe we need to talk. You might be having, it's not quite a clear cut which model you should go with. So take a look at that online and see if you're able to figure out what model works for you. So going on beyond thinking about, okay, how am I going to license XDB? You also have to now, let's say you choose you're going to license internally or not, you need to license Mongo. So you've got your open source option. This is really great if your team's totally set on taking on everything. You can take on the open source and just go without the normal licensing costs. There is commercial available. You can get this through Sitecore, and the Sitecore one gives you a very good 2-hour 24 by 365 SLA. You're completely covered there from a support perspective. You can also go through MongoDB, and they have a couple of models that you can go with. Either one, they have a cloud managed service, and they also have the Enterprise Advanced, which is similar to what you're seeing with the commercial Sitecore one. And then you also have options like MongoLab. So MongoLab is a cloud, like Mongo as a service, essentially. I've used this for my own development because I can get 500 megs for free storage up on the web. I don't have to think about it. I don't have to set up a server. So it's very good for that kind of hosted model where you just don't want to think about it. And then their pricing packages are going to vary by usage. So you want to compare what's your usage going to be like and see which of these models is going to make the most sense for you. Now, just while we're talking about licensing, some of you may have known that the MyXFind integration is phased out over this summer. What that means is that you're now looking at trying to go directly to Sitecore's App Center and getting the new geolocation service. This allows you to purchase a license for this very similarly to how MaxMind works. You pay a subscription fee based on usage, and you can download, and we've put some links in here so that when this slide deck is available for your download, you can go straight there and find the information you need. There's also a PDF available so that you can get the whole setup done yourself. It's quite straightforward, and that'll transition you away from the MaxMind service and towards the new Sitecore geolocation service. So the last section that we want to talk about here is the operational side of things. So for you guys on the ops team who might be having to deal with the day-to-day ongoing use of the system, there's now real-time monitoring that you should be putting in place now. So you may not have been doing it previously with the way DMS was set up. With the number of servers that are now in part of this Xtb infrastructure, you really need to make sure that those things are up. Making sure that, let's say you're using Cloud XDB, you can use their monitoring. If you're using on-premise, you want to make sure your processing servers are up. You want to make sure that the instances are running and executing correctly. You'll also want to do some kind of regular monthly, maybe quarterly, it depends on what your team can handle, to monitor things like data usage and also how's your cache being used, what's your memory like, especially if you're using any kind of hosted option. You're paying for that memory usage and your processing usage, and the data storage costs can get quite high. So you want to make sure you're getting rid of old content, disabling anything you don't actually need on those service instances, follow the best practices that are set out there for Mongo, and make sure that you're trying to lower as much as possible the storage you're using on the disk to avoid any kind of overages.
Okay.
In addition, there's a few last things that you'll want to go and look up from an operational references perspective. So there's a bunch of, the performance tuning guide from Sitecore 7 still applies. Best practices are in there, and that'll really help you from a performance perspective. But on the Mongo side and the XDB hardware guidelines, you'll want to be looking at those performance things that you can set up now and make sure that you're running as lean as possible, since a lot of your costs are going to be based on usage now.
And actually, inside of dev.sitecore.net, there's quite extensive additional documentation on all of those individual pieces that were shown in the diagram.
Yep.
Okay, so last but not least, a few quick tips.
Right, so one for the devs who are out there, if you've got the Sitecore Instance Manager, get that 1.4 version, because if you're lazy like me, you probably didn't want to have to go set up MongoDB as a service on your machine. It now does it for you. You right-click on a little button, and boom, you got Mongo running on your server. This is not something that you want to be doing for rolling out your production instance, but if you're lazy like me, as I said, and you want it up quick, that's a good little tip. A lot of people ask about how are you going to disable the XDB if it's not ready to go. Sitecore's actually put out an KB article on this. There are things that do not work if XDB is off, and there's some things that are just don't work cleanly. They might throw exceptions in your logs, so you might be seeing things happening on your servers. So make sure you read that article about how to do it. It's a little bit different than how it was in Sitecore 7. And you may also be in a situation where you're running a custom GeoIP and wondering if that's going to work if you upgrade to XDB. So it's supposed to, but the recommendation is that you still go and do some regression testing on it. The caveat being obviously that as Sitecore evolves with the new Sitecore GeoIP location service, XDB and that service might be moving in tandem together, and your custom service may not be working quite as well going forward, or you may not be able to take advantage of new features that are coming along.
Okay, a couple of more tips, and I will mention, I'll go to the last slide here really quick. We are publishing an XDB white paper due out next week or so that is going to have almost all of this part 2 stuff in further detail and a fully fleshed out FAQ session. So this is really just a quick summary of that. So keep a lookout for that white paper because it will give you more details on what's in here. But just real quick, CDN such as Akamai, this question comes up a lot. Does it work with XDB, etc.? our main recommendation there is that it should be used for asset acceleration and asset delivery, so your JS files, your images, your videos. In order for XDB to work properly, Sitecore does have to be serving the requests, so to completely offload to an edge cache device is going to mean you're not getting the benefits of Sitecore. If you've got privacy considerations, the cloud does not yet comply. I understand there is a Sitecore security white paper that's due to be published that will give you more information about that. If you do deploy on-premise, you obviously have control about how any identifying info is managed. I'm probably just going to skip the last one in the interest of time. You can read about it a little bit further. I'm going to close now and say thank you very much for listening. We do have a couple of questions that came in that I'll address real quick. The audio and the slide deck will be available after the presentation, so we will get that information out to you some way or another. A quick question from Felix Todd. How can we add correlation to outside events for conversion events, such as you read an offer and then you go into a fixed store? My comment there would be this is exactly the kind of thing where that session state capability comes in with Sitecore. So as long as you have some sort of unique identifier whereby that person is identified on the website when they read an offer, and then later if they go to purchase something in a different physical location, if you can send some sort of ping back to Sitecore with their unique identifier, Sitecore will do the heavy lifting of merging those things so that you can actually start to see that kind of correlation. But the challenge, of course, becomes identifying the person when they make a physical purchase. The technology is there to do so. It's just a matter of those endpoints being able to do that ping. Has Nonlinear been able to come with a formula for estimating MongoDB storage? I believe there actually is a formula posted inside of dev.sitecore.net, and I think I'd have to double check, I think it's 30 kilobytes per interaction. Jason, is that ringing a bell?
I don't remember the exact numbers on it, but I do have a link in here for hardware requirements, which I think spoke to some of that calculator stuff in it.
If I recall correctly, it's 30 kilobytes per interaction. And kind of scales up from there if you're doing something more sophisticated, but you can use that as a rule of thumb. So feel free to reach out to us on Twitter if you have any other questions, and thank you very much for your time.